The two guys were surrounded by a crowd of 1,000 zombies. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a short retelling of the third and fourth episodes of the sixth season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. Once this video gets 200 likes, I will release the next installment. Enjoy watching it.
Rick, Glenn, Michonne, and the Alexandrians race through the woods towards Alexandria, where rock continues to sound. Half of the herd in the quarry follows closely behind them. On the radio, Rick tells Daryl not to turn off the path and not to interfere with the rest of the herd moving along the road. Lick tells his team that he's going to pick up the van and redirect the stray herd before it reaches Alexandria. In private, he tells Glenn and Michonne that not all Alexandrians will survive. Lick instructs them to lead the group back to Alexandria, and Heath overhears the conversation. At this moment, one of the Alexandrians is wounded by a walker, and he bleeds. Michonne stabs him in the head with a knife, after which Rick removes a gun and an energy bar from the corpse. The remaining Alexandrians look on in horror at what is happening. Meanwhile, the rock stops. Glenn and Michonne lead the group towards Alexandria. The walkers attack, throwing the Alexandrians into a panic. Sturgy shoots wildly into the air and hits the cattle in the leg, after which he runs away. Nicholas becomes paralyzed with fear, and the walker bites David on the shoulder. Meanwhile, Daryl tells Abraham and Sasha that he is leaving them to help protect Alexandria. Abraham and Sasha beg Daryl to stay until they reach the 20-mile mark, as planned. However, Daryl refuses and leaves on his motorcycle. David tells Michonne about his wife, hoping that he will be able to see her before he dies from the bite. And he doesn't insist that they stop to treat Scott's leg. The group checks cars in an abandoned city to find out if they can get home. Heath recognizes this city as the place where Aiden and Nicholas made a disastrous and deadly raid for supplies. Nicholas admits that he and Aiden didn't know what they were doing. Reluctantly, Heath instructs Nicholas to show them how to get through the city. With Nicholas at the head, the group stumbles upon walkers feasting on Sturgis' body. Nicholas is paralyzed by fear again, but he comes out of it when Glenn calls his name. The group returns back, but encounters new walkers. They retreat to the pet store, where Glenn devises a plan to set fire to a nearby building to distract the herd. Over the radio, Glenn tells Rick about his plan. Meanwhile, Rick runs down the road and fights off a group of walkers, cutting his hand in the process. Back at the pet store, Annie and Scott note that their wounds slow down movement. They urge the group to continue on without them. Heath looks at Michonne and refuses to leave anyone behind. After that, Michonne asks Heath about his behavior, and he tells her that he overheard Rick's instructions to leave his people. Michonne angrily reminds Heath that he wasn't there like Rick, so he doesn't understand why it's sometimes necessary to leave people behind. Heath counters that he's run away many times, but Michonne remarks that he's never been covered in so much blood that he didn't know if it was your blood, walkers, or your friends. In town, Glenn and Nicholas find a walker trapped under a car. Nicholas recognizes the walking silt as a young man whom he and Aiden left behind during a trip for supplies. That's why Nicholas insists on killing the walker himself. Stabbing him in the head with a knife, he and Glenn hear gunshots coming from the direction of Alexandria, and rush to run. Meanwhile, Rick is running down the road, desperately trying to get to the van, where he finally gets to the van. Michonne's group sits in silence, watching a walker walk past a shop window. Michonne sees David writing a farewell note to his wife. When he tries to hand it over to her, she refuses to take it. Instead, she writes on her hand "You will come home," and shows it to him. Suddenly, the walkers who were hiding in the back room of the store start banging on the inner door, attracting the attention of the walkers outside. When the herd arrives in town, Michonne's group runs out of the store with weapons at the ready. However, it does not fall, and it is devoured by walkers. Meanwhile, Glenn and Nicholas reach the feed store and discover that it has already burned to the ground. Glenn desperately offers Nicholas another building while a huge herd moves towards them. Michonne's group reaches the gate and one by one climbs over it. The herd catches up with Michonne and David and claws at them while they climb over the gate. The walkers pull David away from the gate and tear him apart, and Heath looks on in horror at what is happening. In another city, walkers corner Glenn and Nicholas in an alley. Glenn climbs onto the dumpster and helps Nicholas up, while walkers surround them and grab their legs. Looking at the swarming horde around, Nicholas suddenly calms down. "Thanks," he says to Glenn and shoots himself in the head. Nicholas' falling corpse knocks Glenn into a herd, and he screams when he is overtaken by a herd of feasting walkers. A grim, exhausted Michonne and Heath help Scott limp through the woods. As they make their way through the stream, Heath is shocked to see his reflection soaked in blood in the water. Meanwhile, Rick stops the van at the edge of the forest, where Glenn sent him to intercept the herd. He tries to contact Glenn and Tobin on the walkie-talkie, but gets no response. Then he contacts Daryl on the radio to inform him that the separated herd will soon return to service. While Rick is waiting, two men make their way to the van and shoot him. These are the wolves that Morgan let escape. Rick dives for cover and returns fire, killing them. Then he sees that other wolves are sneaking up to the van, and opens fire on them with a machine gun, killing them all. Daryl hears gunfire on the walkie-talkie and calls Rick, but gets no response. He rushes along the road, reluctantly joining Abraham and Sasha, as the herd moves behind them. Michonne, Heath and Scott arrive in Alexandria and discover that all the buildings on the outskirts have been burned down. Rick tries to start the van, but the engine stalls. He keeps trying and trying, but unsuccessfully. Also, a huge herd starts coming out of the forest next to him. Now, in Alexandria's cell, Morgan visits Owen, the wolf he captured, and remembers how he said he wanted to take everything Morgan had. "Well, here it is," Morgan says, starting the story. Then, in the flashback, Morgan is ranting to himself in the apartment. His lantern falls and a fire starts. Now homeless Morgan hunts walkers in the woods and burns their bodies in his campsite. He sharpens long sticks and builds around the camp. One day, while hunting, two men chase him into the forest. He kills them by stabbing one in the neck and strangling the other. Morgan recreates his bunker in King County on the campgrounds, using the blood of walkers to scrawl a message on the surrounding rocks and trees. While hunting, Morgan follows the sound of a goat and discovers a secluded log cabin. The man orders him to lower the gun. Morgan ignores the warning and pursues a man who ambushes Morgan and knocks him unconscious with a blow of his staff. Morgan wakes up in a cell inside the hut. "Kill me," he begs. The man introduces himself as Eastman and hands Morgan the book The Art of the World. Morgan watches as Eastman runs outside to kill the walker with his staff and then drag his body into the woods. Eastman brings the goat Obita into the house for the night and asks Morgan not to harm her. A few days pass. Morgan remains in his cell, ranting and muttering to himself. He watches Eastman practicing martial arts with his staff outside. He finally talks to Morgan and explains that he used to be a forensic psychiatrist. Eastman asks what Morgan was doing before the fall and what he is doing now. "I'm cleaning," Morgan replies. "Walking people, anything that comes near me, I kill." "That's the biggest bullshit I've ever heard," Eastman says. He explains his philosophy that people are not made for murder, and says that he met only one evil person among the many criminals he interviewed for his work. He then tells Morgan that the cell door has been open all this time and offers Morgan to leave whenever he wants. "Or stay," Eastman suggests. "Lie down on the sofa and we'll try to find another way out for you." Morgan opens the door and rushes at Eastman. During the struggle, they crash into a piece of drywall with a child's drawing hanging on the wall and break it in two. Enraged, Eastman picks up the broken painting and leaves, while Morgan returns to the camera. That evening, Eastman explains that he used Aikido to defeat Morgan. He shows him a rabbit's foot and says that he received a flyer about this martial art the day after his daughter gave him a rabbit's foot. He believes that Aikido has improved his life. The next morning, Eastman asks Morgan to look after Tabitha while he goes on a search. In his cell, Morgan opens the book The Art of the World. On the first page there is a handwritten note stating that the goal of Aikido is to completely avoid killing even the most evil person. Morgan then hears the walkers outside about to attack Tabitha and runs to her aid. Morgan drags the dead walkers into the woods and discovers a cemetery with wooden grave markers. When he digs a grave for walkers, Eastman joins him. Eastman finds the driver's license of dead walkers and cuts out their names. Back at the house, Eastman gives Morgan his own staff and eventually teaches Morgan Aikido. Morgan also continues to study the art of peace. At dinner, Morgan asks why Eastman needs a camera. Eastman tells him that he once interrogated a convicted murderer named Crichton Dallas Wilton, whom he recognized as a real psychopath. Eastman recommended that he not be released on parole. Wilton escaped, killed Eastman's family, and then turned himself in to the police. Eastman claims that he built the cell with the intention of abducting Wilton and starving him to death. Morgan takes Eastman to his campsite to pick up the supplies he took from the people he killed. Sensing Morgan's injury, Eastman orders him to practice his forms of Aikido. A walker is approaching the campsite. Morgan readies his staff, but freezes when he realizes that the walker is the man he strangled to death. Eastman pushes the paralyzed Morgan out of the way and kills the walker, but he himself is bitten. "You shouldn't have done that," Morgan shouts, attacking Eastman, but he repels Morgan's attack. "I said not here," Morgan shouts. "That's the thing about Morgan," Eastman replies before walking away. Morgan stays at the campsite and returns to his old habits, carving spears and hunting walkers in the woods. He kills a walker and discovers that he has saved a young couple. Morgan is about to attack them, but the woman slowly offers him a can of food and a bullet, thanks him, and then retreats with her companion. Morgan lets the couple leave, and he runs back to Eastman's hut, where he finds a walker devouring Tabitha. He gloomily kills a goat and takes the bodies to the cemetery, where Eastman digs the ground. Morgan notices the tombstone of Crichton Dallas Wilton. Eastman confesses that he kidnapped Wilton from prison and starved him to death. "What I did to him haunted me," he says. Back at the house, Eastman tells Morgan that there will be enough energy, food, and security for the rest of his life, but advises Morgan not to stay alone. "Everything depends on people, everything in this life matters," he says. Before she dies, Eastman gives Morgan her rabbit's foot. Morgan comes out of the hut with a staff and a backpack. He walks through the cemetery where Eastman is now buried. He reaches the railway track and finds a pointer to Terminus. Returning to the present, Morgan ends his story by suggesting that Owen can be saved, as well as himself. Owen shows Morgan a deep cut on his torso and predicts that he will die. "But if not, I'll have to kill you, Morgan," he says. "I'll have to kill every single person here." Morgan leaves, locking the door. Then, outside, Morgan hears Rick yelling for the gate to be opened.